What if I told you that in the next 5 years, the thing deciding whether you live or die could be a robotic barista? Would you believe me? I doubt it, but I'm gonna try to give you a reason to think about it a little more right now. Humans have argued about right and wrong for like 3,000 years, and now we're packing that entire debate into about 25 lines of code. But what could go wrong? A lot, actually. Because this happy-looking hunk of metal might have to decide whether it plows into a school bus or drives off a bridge. Tying philosophy into this whole debate, we see that Kantians would rather draw harsh boundaries, fail-safes you might say, whereas utilitarians would rather do the cold hard math to see what options lead to the most quote-unquote happiness among the community. We're here to see which side RoboCop might pick and which might be best for us. Just a decade ago, if someone had mentioned a humanoid or a robot, we'd scoff in disapproval. I mean, haven't we all seen iRobot? Now, we see companies like Tesla hoping to produce and ship thousands of human-like units by the end of this year, with Goldman Sachs forecasting 1.4 million annual shipments by 2035. So yeah, the stakes are pretty high. So let's talk a little bit about Kant. An 18th century philosopher, Immanuel Kant had questionable hair game, but a moral framework that many revere as foundational to modern philosophical discussion. The biggest pillar in his moral philosophy is the categorical imperative. He defines it as, quote, acting only on maxims that you can will as universal law. Essentially, Kant is defining himself here as a rule book purist. The big idea here is that morality is focused on your duty, not so much on the outcomes of your actions. That makes it easy to have crystal clear guidelines. In the end, people tend to trust systems that never fudge the rules. It would be a lot easier to code guardrails like these. For example, the robot might be coded to never be allowed to kill a human, under any circumstance. And while this may mean the robot will never kill a human itself, it might mean its inaction will cost the lives of many. This might manifest as something called edge case paralysis. The robot sees two humans in equal danger, but cannot save either, as it would harm the other. There would also be no room for compassion or triage in this framework, if it conflicted with duty, of course. And this is exactly where Mill steps in with his framework of utilitarianism. The main idea here is that right actions are those that maximize overall happiness. But the question is, would we judge every situation from a fresh perspective, or instead adopt rules that in the long run maximize happiness? This is the distinction between act and rule utilitarianism, and Mill decided to lean more towards the rule side of things. He also creates a distinction between higher and lower pleasures. Mill might claim that saving a world-renowned pianist might outweigh saving 3 couch potatoes not adding much to society. This just leads to some messy value math. However, we do need to acknowledge the upsides to what Mill is saying here. His framework adapts to context. We can weigh odds, ages, the future life that one has to live. These are all things that humans do, but might not realize. Another example might be letting a car pick the least bad outcome in a car wreck that might have been unavoidable altogether. I think we're onto something here because these robots are starting to sound a little bit more human, but we might have to think again. A model like this might require different numerical values for, well, lives. Who's deciding these weights and values? A grandpa versus a newborn? Are we gonna allow AI to reinforcement learn and teach itself that as well? At that point, is it our moral framework or is it theirs? And honestly, I wouldn't love being a line item in someone else's spreadsheet. All right, let's go back to Kant for a second. I forgot to mention that Kant actually has something called the humanity formula. No surprise he's got a formula for that too. Anyways, let's get to his definition. He defines it as, quote, acting so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of any other, always as an end and never merely as a means. If you've ever heard someone complain about being used, this is what they mean. Treating someone as the tool and not the prize is what Kant is working to highlight here. He's arguing that a human life has intrinsic worth, meaning that no cost and no trade may override it. And therefore, by design, Kant's moral framework would work by not endangering non-consenting humans, like ever. The concrete outcome would be that no one would ever get hurt as a result of a robot's voluntary action. There would be a failsafe, a line drawn within its code saying that you're never to hurt a human regardless of the outcome. Jumping back to Mill, we would see something called a happiness ledger, where each action gets a utility score. It would be the sum of all pleasures multiplied by their respective weights, minus the sum of all pains multiplied by their respective weights as well. Surprise, another formula. Therefore, if a robot assesses a situation in which it may see a small possibility of a human getting hurt, but assigns a much larger probability of maximizing utility among many people, it might just take that risk and go for the higher utility score. So we've gone nowhere and we don't really know what to choose. Why don't we take a look at what's actually going on in the industry today? Here's a little reality check. Self-driving cars exist and they've been deployed in our world today. So how the hell do they choose what's right and what's wrong? Well, their design consists of 3 main layers. The first layer follows a Kantian framework. It's a don't you dare layer. Essentially, every single line of a car bot code must run through a giant safety checklist to make sure that you and those around you are safe. The bottom line here is that if sensors glitch and everything goes haywire, the system must slam its brakes and make sure that you come to a safe halt. This should remind you of Kant's emphasis on intention rather than outcome. If a car comes to a halt, it's doing so because it's glitched, and the humans that coded it have decided that this would be the safest failsafe for the car. Therefore, the intention is to save the person inside without harming others. It's crucial to realize that for this step, intention is outweighing outcome. In some scenarios, the car coming to a halt might actually cause some harm to the person inside or others. But for the purposes of this step, this is a byproduct of the framework, and so it must be accepted. The second step follows a more utilitarian framework. Mill's getting real excited here. Basically, we're allowing the car to think, just inside these guardrails that step 1 is set for it. It's able to run millions of what-if simulations every second, figuring out the best course of action. A good example would be a company like Waymo. They train their cars on billions of virtual miles, accounting for almost every single possible outcome to see how their car software would react. Okay, it looks like we're getting somewhere now. And the third and final layer could be called something like a receipt layer or prove it layer. This layer essentially forces the developers to keep a readable log of every ethical fork in the road that the car software had faced. This is nice because once they become timestamped and hashed, they're audit ready and valuable to learn from. A fun fact is that under the EU AI Act, losing that sort of log could cost up to 35 million euros. So you know those engineers might be treating that data like it's their mom's fine china. It's a big deal. It's interesting that both philosophers we've spoken about today might actually agree with this third transparency step. Believe it or not, Kant cared about us, and so he would think that we deserve the reasons behind the actions of the robots. On the other hand, you can't really claim that Mill would have cared about each of us over the community, obviously. But he definitely would have thought that data improves our abilities to measure and iterate. And in some sense, that would help to create algorithms better at optimizing utility. Whatever gets it done for Mill, I guess. At the end of the day, we could see a marriage between the ideas of these two greats. It's almost impossible to navigate this new landscape with no hard boundaries, but also without a sense of rationale and empathetic thinking. And that's exactly why when we ask the question of whether Kant's moral framework or Mill's would work best within the minds of these robots, we need to take a step back and look at what we actually do on a daily basis. And I'm sure those who've watched this have hard moral boundaries, big no-nos they'd never do, but they'd also might have a case-by-case analysis while going through the motions. And yes, the question of whether we want these robots to be human-like is another debate altogether. However, I'm sure we all want them to have some sort of human empathy coded into their framework. I'm pretty sure we mentioned iRobot, and I'm also pretty sure nobody wants that, so let's hope this all works out.